Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of digital fate. I'm Richie, this is Capricorn, and it is 4 o'clock in the morning. I stayed up all night long to finish this video before heading off to catch my plane to SCG Con Milwaukee, because you guys absolutely have to see these crazy decks in action. They're probably going to be popping up all over the place at SCG Con Milwaukee, and now you get a chance here to see them at the finals for SCG Con Portland. It was YoYo against SneakyJoe, and the match was absolutely insane. More importantly, the deck is absolutely crazy. This is the meta right now. This deck is insanely powerful. It never runs out of gas. It was designed by Vortex. Shout out to Vortex for coming up with this crazy idea. The deck's just nuts. I do have a pretty cool idea for a deck that I think might take it down, and I'm going to try my luck at SCG Con Milwaukee with that deck and see if I can bring down this behemoth. So wish me luck. But with all of that out of the way, I have a plane to catch. Let's check out the game. And we are off to the races. It is YoYo against SneakyJoeKDB, and they're both using a variation of the same deck, a brand new deck that seems to be taking the meta by storm after the recent DBS updates. It's going to start here with YoYo playing a Brimstone Crypt into Realm 1, and then Sneaky follows it up by playing a Quiet Creek into Realm 1. The Brimstone Crypt in particular is really good in a deck like this because there are cards that can get exponentially more protector counters of it later on in the game. YoYo considering his next play, and he decides to drop a Betrayer of Ironskin Clan, probably the best round 1 play that this deck has. Whenever anyone harvests anything, YoYo will now gain 1 extra energy. This works for your opponent's lands, for your own lands, and it works for harvesting wonders as well. Both players are pretty excited to see what happens when both of these decks come face to face against each other. SneakyJoe follows up with another Quiet Creek in Realm 1. All of his cheap Betrayal Wonders are going to come in super buffed now with 2 Quiet Creeks out. YoYo's trying to decide how to spend his last action. Will he attack? Will he draw? Maybe he has something else he wants to play. He decides to attack in Realm 1, taking the stone. And it's back to SneakyJoe. He decides to spend his last action drawing a card, and that will be the end of round 1. It will be the beginning of round 2, with the second realm unlocked and the second stone up for grabs. Both players will begin by drawing a card for the round. YoYo has a little bit of an energy lead here with 3 energy to Sneaky's 2, and the Betrayer out, which can gain him even more energy whenever anyone harvests. YoYo's also on the play. It looks like both players are looking over their hands, carefully thinking about how to sequence things out correctly to get in front of everything the opponent's going to be doing. Looks like we're going to start with YoYo. He plays a Resonance Reach in Realm 2. Again, another on-harvest ability here that puts a shield counter on target wonder. Sneaky follows up by playing Commanding Croak into Realm 2, giving him the ability to tap free and seek 5 a land. Because this deck has so many lands in it, it almost always hits, and usually you have nice versatility in being able to choose between a couple different options as well. Not to mention the fact that you just get 4 power in Realm 2 as well, which is not nothing. Seems like YoYo's thinking about whether he wants to contest Realm 2 or not. He decides to play a Chieftain Klee, doubling down on Realm 1. Now here's where things get crazy. Whenever you activate the on-harvest ability of a land, you may activate it an additional time. Which means that Brimstone Crypt spits out 2 protector counters, and that Resonance Reach spits out 2 shield counters. Sneaky follows up by using the Commanding Croak to seek 5 and find a land. He does end up tossing away a Chieftain-Clee, a Calyth, and an Ashen Leaf, which is kinda rough, but he finds a Sunfire City, puts it into play in Realm 2. It's worth pointing out that the land has to enter play in the same realm as the Commanding Croak. YoYo follows up by harvesting the Resonance Reach, gaining an action, and putting 2 shield counters on any 2 target wonders. More than likely, he'll put 1 on each here. The Chieftain-Clee and the Betrayer of Ironskin Clan are the 2 most important cards in this deck, arguably. The fact that YoYo has them both out so early is kind of huge. It does look like he split up the shield counters there, 1 on the Betrayer and 1 on the Chieftain-Clee. And he also gained energy because of the Betrayer. Sneaky's trying to think about how to follow that up. He decides to play a Scouting Barnail in Realm 1. A very unassuming card, 1 cost, 2 power, but whenever it would gain any +1 counters, it instead gains that amount plus an additional 2, which means each of those Quiet Creeks trigger putting 3 +1 counters on it for each one. It comes in as a whopping 8 power for 0 energy because he has the link. Absolutely nuts. Does YoYo continue to fight over Realm 1? No. He's going to use the Brimstone Crypt, harvest it, and because he has that Chieftain-Clee in play, he's going to get 2 Protector counters. It's going to take Sneaky 3 consecutive attacks, winning attacks at that, in order to take that stone in Realm 1. Kind of a good play. It means that even if Sneaky does have the power advantage there, he's at an action disadvantage if he tries to take the stone. It's back to Sneaky. It'll be interesting to see how he tries and deals with this. He decides to pivot and attack in Realm 2, cut his losses. Oh, no. Looks like he's changing his mind. It's worth pointing out that unless there's any new information unveiled, you can take back your last action. Looks like YoYo's thinking about how to follow this up. He does have a ton of actions because of harvesting those lands. He decides to play a serious Aether Blade into Realm 2. 4 cost, 4 power. More importantly, opponents' items with cost 2 or less and enemies with cost 2 or less are nullified. Which means if Sneaky Joe plays a Betrayer of Ironskin Clan, it won't work for him. It can also shut down a bunch of other stuff. YoYo decides to spend an action, draw a card. And it's back to Sneaky Joe. It's also worth pointing out that even though Serious Aether Blade doesn't shut down an opposing Chieftain-Clee, it will shut down an opposing Vob Stalker that is copying a Chieftain-Clee. And it looks like it's the end of round 2, the beginning of round 3. YoYo finished round 2 playing a Cedar Shade Ruins there. They're both going to draw a card at the beginning of the round. YoYo will start at 4 energy to Sneaky Joe's 3. And YoYo is again on the play. Both players considering all of their options. Looks like YoYo passes and Sneaky Joe decides to play Twilight Marsh in Realm 3. This is a really important land for the deck as you can get a bunch of extra actions out of it when you have Chieftain-Clees on the board. YoYo follows up by playing his own Twilight Marsh in Realm 3, and then Sneaky plays an Indra's Citadel into Realm 2. Things are looking pretty crazy already. It's back to YoYo, and he decides to play a Calyth in Realm 3, tapping down Sneaky's Indra's Citadel, a really good 3-for-1, kind of 4-for-1 play. And Sneaky follows suit with the exact same card. He plays his own Kalith, untapping the Indra's Citadel that YoYo just tapped down. It looks like both players are at a standoff now, with equal power in both Realm 2 and Realm 3. And Sneaky not necessarily wanting to attack in 1 because of all of the protector counters. Very tricky. YoYo decides to draw a card, and then both players pass. That will be the end of round 3. It is the beginning of round 4. The early rounds in this game are going by quick. Both players are experienced players, and they know exactly what they want to do as they're curving out and building out their board. They're going to start by drawing a card for the round. YoYo still has a little bit of an energy lead here because he controls the stone in 1. He's at 5 energy to Sneaky's 4. And he decides to start by playing another Brimstone Crypt into Realm 2. Sneaky has a lot to consider here, decides to drop a Market of Lost Wonders into Realm 4. Both players just absolutely layering value in the form of action potential on the board, which is exactly what this deck is best at doing. It's back to YoYo. He's looking over the cards in his hand. We're still at a standstill in Realm 2 and Realm 3. Be interesting to see what he finally decides to do. Does he decide to push for the new realm? Or double down on Realm 2 or 3? Seems like he's got it figured out. He decides to play a Rust Trooper in Realm 2. This will give him the power he needs in 2 to finally take the stone there, as well as getting a really good card onto the table to be used against a deck like this. Sneaky follows up by playing Seer's Gaze, which is going to draw him a ton of cards, I believe 6, which is just crazy. Seer's Gaze saw a lot of play when this game first released, but it kind of fell off a little bit in the preceding months. He decides to attack in Realm 2, taking the stone. Sometimes Seer's Gaze can be really tricky to pull off because you need to be able to keep all of your lands untapped, and tempo is so important. Sneaky follows up by playing a Sunfire City in Realm 3, just layering even more lands, even more action potential onto the board. And YoYo continues to follow suit by harvesting his Brimstone Crypt in 2, getting 2 more protector counters, splitting them up, putting 1 on Sirius and 1 on the Rust Trooper. Having a Rust Trooper in play while his opponent has 7 untapped lands is just insane. Honestly, could be enough value to win him the game all by itself. Sneaky decides to harvest his Indra's Citadel to get 2 actions, and because of that, the Rust Trooper will trigger and put counters on all of his guys. And Rust Trooper looks at how many actions. Whenever you get actions, you're going to get counters. So even though only 1 land was harvested, you still get to put 2 counters on each of those wonders. Both players still considering all of their options. And it looks like YoYo is going to play a Celestium Heights into Realm 4, trying to keep up with Sneaky Joe's action advantage. And Sneaky Joe plays Another Seer's Gaze? Absolutely crazy. He'll draw 6 cards again. It's back to YoYo. YoYo's out of actions, it looks like. Sneaky's got 1 action left. And it looks like YoYo's trying to decide if he should harvest. And he goes for it. He harvests his Celestium Heights, gains an action. And it's back to Sneaky. Both players sitting on 1 action right now. But Sneaky has a ton of action potential with all of those lands. The problem is if he harvests any of them, he triggers YoYo's Rust Trooper and grows his board just to an insane degree. He decides to play an Ethereal Grove in Realm 3, copying YoYo's Cedar Shade Ruins, making it so that any of his wonders in Realm 3 won't be able to be nullified. Interesting move. He must have plans for Realm 3 down the line. Otherwise, I would think he'd want a symbiosis with his Market of Lost Wonders. It'll be interesting to see where this playline leads. YoYo decides to play another Calyth into Realm 4 and untap his own Brimstone Crypt. Giving him access to even more potential protector counters seems kind of insane. And don't forget, each of those Calyths can be harvested for actions themselves. It's one of the pound for pound best cards in the game. Just pure action advantage, pure value. No matter what deck you're playing. Which is why they cranked up the DBS in the last DBS update. Sneaky's thinking about all of his options. Does he want to harvest? Does he want to actually trigger the Rust Trooper? Risk triggering the Rust Trooper in order to do more this round? More than likely, he's trying to find a way to get rid of the Rust Trooper while harvesting the least number of lands in the process. Looks like Sneaky's going to harvest after all. He harvests one of his Quiet Creeks for just 1 action, and that Rust Trooper will trigger, putting an additional counter on each of his wonders. And now that he has another Calyth in play, that second Calyth will get 1 counter as well. So the more wonders that YoYo gets out onto the board, the more value he'll get out of the Rust Trooper. It's in YoYo's best interest to try and just flood the board with wonders to take advantage of the Rust Trooper. He decides to harvest a Brimstone Crypt, getting an extra trigger off the Chieftain Clee just like last time, and getting 2 more protector counters. 1 on the Rust Trooper, and 1 on Sirius Aetherblade. We're only halfway through the game, and the board is already nuts. But I promise you guys, you haven't seen anything yet, because this deck just gets absolutely ridiculous and snowballs into insanity. You'll see what I mean. Sneaky Joe's considering his options. The play is to him. And it looks like he decides to play his own Betrayer of Ironskin Clan. Now it's worth pointing out that since it is a 2-cost wonder, it is nullified by Sirius Aetherblade. Which means he won't actually be able to get energy from it until the Sirius is gone. Plays to YoYo. He decides to attack in Realm 4, taking the stone there. Does Sneaky just let him? Or does he want to keep going? Again, it's a tricky decision to make because he could probably do more, but he probably doesn't want to trigger the Rust Trooper more than he needs to. That being said, it looks like he is going to harvest 2 lands here. He's just going all in, it looks like. He gets 2 actions. And a bunch of counters on everything. That Rust Trooper is a force. And it's back to YoYo. Does he decide to harvest anything? Or is he going to just let Sneaky Joe do his thing? It looks like he's thinking about passing. I think he passes to Sneaky Joe, and Sneaky follows up by playing another Scouting Barnail, this time into Realm 3. Again, it will enter with a ton of counters on it. It's 8 power because of those 2 Quiet Creeks. Absolutely nuts that you can get that much power for no energy. It's back to YoYo. Is he going to pass again? It makes sense that YoYo would continue to pass here and just wait until round 5. Sneaky is way ahead on action potential, and I don't think he wants to waste the action potential that he does have built up. He's going to need to save some of it for after he gets more Chieftain Klees out, or just the late game in general, to be able to stand toe-to-toe with all of Sneaky's value. Sneaky played a Phoenix Quill. I'm curious if he needs the energy, or if he's just looking to cycle his hand out. I could see it going either way, to be completely honest. It's back to YoYo, and more than likely YoYo will pass again. Both players considering their options before figuring out if they want to end the round. That Phoenix Quill is beautiful though, I have to admit. And it looks like both players decide to pass and end the round. So that will be the end of round 4. It is the beginning of round 5. The 5th realm is unlocked. The 5th stone is up for grabs. YoYo is still in the lead here, has a huge tempo advantage, but Sneaky Joe has so much action advantage. It'll be interesting to see how things shake out. YoYo starts with 8 energy because he controls 3 stones, and he'll start by playing an Emerald Clearing into Realm 4. Now remember, that Chieftain Klees gives you an extra trigger of the On Harvest ability, so that Emerald Clearing is worth a +4 bonus, not just a +2 bonus. YoYo decides to draw a card. Following Sneaky Joe's sacrifice of the Phoenix Quill, looks like he got the energy but decided to keep his hand. And it's back to Sneaky Joe. Is he ready to pull the trigger? It looks like he might be. And he drops a Chieftain Klees himself into Realm 5. Very good play. He still has access to a Market of Lost Wonders and a Twilight Marsh that can both generate extra value from the 𝐷𝐿𝐼 in the form of extra actions. But it looks like YoYo has something up his sleeve. He's thinking. Again, Sneaky Joe has so much potential action advantage here, especially after dropping that 𝐷𝐿𝐼. And it's only going to get crazier as the game goes on. But don't underestimate that Rust Trooper. Regardless of how many actions Sneaky has access to, that Rust Trooper can get really crazy really fast. Looks like YoYo's got something up his sleeve. He decides to play a serious Aether Blade into Realm 5. This will give him some redundancy, doubling up on his ability to nullify any 2-drops that Sneaky Joe plays. Speaking of which, he just played a Vobstalker into Realm 3, and he's going to try to use the Symbiosis to gain the abilities of the 𝐷𝐿𝐼 in Realm 5. But the problem is, it should be nullified by both of YoYo's serious Aether Blades, so its Symbiosis should be completely turned off. I think this was an oversight by the players. It'll be interesting to see if he continues to get triggers from that Vobstalker as the game goes on, considering the fact that the serious Aether Blade should nullify it. YoYo passed, and Sneaky Joe decided to play a Resonance Reach into Realm 5, and then YoYo passed again, and Sneaky played a 𝐅𝐈𝐑𝐼, just flooding the board with value. Razia is absolutely insane. Personally, I think it's one of the best cards in the game. And to me, it kind of feels like a prototype Stone Seeker in a way. And just thinking about that kind of gets me excited about Call of the Stones. It looks like YoYo's trying to figure out if it's worth it to eke out more value in round 5, or pass in order to move into round 6. He does have some lands he could harvest, and 2 Kalis, which can both be harvested. And it looks like he decides to harvest his Cedar Shade Ruins for 1 action. Sneaky Joe decides to follow that up by harvesting his Resonance Reach. He should get an action and 2 shield counters here. That Vobstalker is nullified, so even though normally he'd get a 3rd shield counter from the Vobstalker, because it's nullified by the Sirius, he should only get 2. It looks like they're still overlooking the Sirius. So he does put a 3rd shield counter on the Betrayer of Ironskin clan. And then the Rust Trooper spits out some +1 counters on all of YoYo's wonders. That Rust Trooper is insane. Especially in this deck, against this deck. It seems to be a perfect answer to your opponent going overboard and getting really greedy with harvesting lands, which is exactly what this deck does. So YoYo has an action now. Sneaky has an action as well. It'll be interesting to see what they actually do with those actions. And it looks like YoYo's going to draw a card. YoYo draws a card, digging deeper into his deck for answers. Sneaky decides to attack in Realm 3, taking the stone. Looks like he has 14 power there. 16 power. And that will be the end of round 5. It is the beginning of round 6. The 6th realm is unlocked. The 6th zone is up for grabs. YoYo is still in the lead. And he'll start with a whopping 9 energy because he controls 3 stones. Sneaky Joe starts by dropping a Twilight Marsh in Realm 6, giving him access to even more action potential because of his 𝐷𝐄𝐈. The play is to YoYo. Looks like he's looking through the cards in his hand, trying to figure out the correct sequence to get ahead of everything that Sneaky Joe's trying to do. And it seems like he's landed on a card decision here. Let's see what he plays. He decides to play another land. It's Sunfire City, banking an extra action for later, trying to rebuild some action advantage to catch up to Sneaky Joe's. And Sneaky decides to attack in Realm 4, taking the stone there with that 𝐅𝐈𝐑𝐿. What a card. It's back to YoYo. The question is, do you try to get back in the lead now? Try to get back some tempo advantage, or do you build to have a really strong round 7? Looks like he's going to attack in Realm 5 and take the stone there. And it's back to Sneaky. And Sneaky's going to play his Plant Terror of Ethereal Grove. You can tell he's been holding on to this for a while, waiting for just the right moment to drop it. And now is the time. The question is, what does he choose to symbiosis with? Can copy the abilities of any 2 target wonders. Not to mention giving him a whopping 7 power in Realm 5 so that he has enough power to take back the stone there if he wants. He's thinking over his options as far as symbiosis. Looks like he's definitely going to grab Razia's ability, which makes sense. Being able to tap to give anything -5 and something else +5 is extremely powerful, especially because you can use it whenever you want to as a tap free. The other symbiosis is going to be on the 𝐷𝐄𝐈. So now he has 2 𝐷𝐄𝐈 abilities that can trigger every time he triggers an on-harvest ability. He would have 3 with the Vob Stalker, but it's nullified by the Sirius. Still, an absolutely crazy board state. It's back to YoYo. And it looks like he's looking at his hand, just trying to figure out what he can do to catch up to the insane value that Sneaky Joe is putting on the board. YoYo does still have the tempo advantage here. He does have more stones. He is in the lead. But Sneaky Joe has an insane amount of action potential and also just incredibly powerful cards on the board. YoYo really needs to dig deep and figure out a way to catch up to all of Sneaky Joe's action potential. And he might have done that he drops an utterly complex compound bow. Possibly the single greatest value engine in the entire game. He puts it on his Rust Trooper. On arrival, it gets a shield counter. Equipped Wonder gets on battle, draw 2 cards, gain an energy, and put 2 -1 counters on target enemy. And it's attuned Heliosynth, so it didn't even cost him an action to do it. Looks like Sneaky Joe responds by using his 𝐅𝐈𝐑𝐒 to give Rust Trooper -5 and give a +5 to himself. No, not to itself. To the Plant Terror. Doubling down on making sure that it's harder for his opponent to kill the Plant Terror, with it being bigger, but more importantly, doubling down on having enough power in Realm 5 to take back that stone before the round is over. That being said, YoYo has access to insane card advantage now because of that bow. Every single attack draws him 2 cards, gives him an energy, and puts 2 -1 counters on any enemy at all. That card is so insane. If you're running Heliosynth and you're not running the bow, what are you doing with your life? Looks like both players are looking over their options. Again, we're back in one of those situations where you could justify just ending the round and going to 7, but you could also justify trying to eke out even more value in 6 before ending the round. And it looks like both players are considering which direction they should go. YoYo seems to have a card in mind here, but he's hesitating. Looks like maybe they're adding up the power of everything in multiple realms. YoYo decides to attack into, triggers the bow, puts 2 -1 counters on the 𝐻𝐿𝐷, draws 2 cards, and gains an energy. Very interesting. Sneaky Joe decides to use the Plant Terror's Razzia ability to tap free, give the Rust Trooper a -5, finally killing it, and also giving a +5 to the 𝐻𝐿𝐷, which will prevent it from dying if it gets hit with more -1 counters from the bow. Although that +5 buff is only this round, so it's not going to prevent it from dying straight up forever, but at the very least, it can keep it around until the end of the round. Looks like YoYo's going to follow up by harvesting the Twilight Marsh. And because he has a 𝐻𝐿𝐷, he'll gain an additional action out of it, getting 3 actions out of that 1 land. And this is where things start to snowball into insanity. Sneaky Joe's going to harvest both Twilight Marshes. He has a 𝐻𝐿𝐷, a Plant Terror, so he should get 4 actions out of each. It looks like he got 5 actions out of each of those Twilight Marshes. So it looks like he's still overlooking the fact that that Vob Stalker is nullified by the Sirius Aether Blade and shouldn't be copying those on-harvest abilities. He's at 10 actions. He should be at 8. Either way, it is a ton of actions and very hard for YoYo to keep up with. That being said, YoYo still does have a fair amount of actions, and he has the bow. And all of his guys are pretty beefed up from that Rust Trooper. Even though it's gone now, it still leaves behind all of those counters. Looks like they both realized that those 2 protector counters should be gone because they were on the Rust Trooper. YoYo decides to attack again in Realm 2, triggering the bow, putting 2 more -1 counters on the �chieftain-𝐾li, drawing 2 cards, and gaining an energy. This does mean that when the temporary buff from Razzia goes away, that �chieftain-𝐾li will die. SneakyJoe decides to spend an action and draw a card. It might be in YoYo's best interest to simply pass here. SneakyJoe has so many more actions than him. It would be better to let SneakyJoe burn himself out of actions before you decide what you do with your final 2 actions. That being said, he could have some really important plays that he needs to get out ASAP, so it could go either way. Looks like both players are doing some math, figuring out who has the upper hand in what realms. Is YoYo going to do anything, or is he going to pass? It looks like he passed. SneakyJoe is organizing his cards so that it's easier to tell how many lands he has and which of them are untapped. Still not entirely sure if YoYo passed or not. It looks like he did pass. Again, both players doing some math, trying to figure out how much power is in Realm 3, it looks like. Should be 16 power for SneakyJoe in Realm 3. And YoYo has 4 power because of the Calyth. No, because it has counters. 7 power. YoYo decides to attack with the bow again, draws a couple cards, gains an energy, shoots out some -1 counters, and it looks like SneakyJoe drew a card. YoYo only has 1 action left. He could harvest more, but again, they're about to go into the final round, and I would think he needs to save as much of his action potential as possible for that final round where it's going to matter that much more. YoYo has that 1 lone action left to Sneaky's 8, which is just absurd. You can start to see how this deck just snowballs into insanity. You gain so many actions that if you need to, you can just use those actions to draw, dig for more of what you need, which eventually gives you cards that give you even more actions, and you just rinse and repeat. Both players considering options that are left open to them, whether or not they should go into round 7 or again try to eke out more value in round 6. Sneaky still has 8 actions available to him. And it seems like YoYo is really torn on whether he should pass or not. I can't believe Sneaky Joe has 8 actions still. It's just crazy. This deck is so crazy. Let's see. YoYo could potentially generate 1, 2, 3, 4 actions with what he has on the board. Sneaky could generate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 actions? 6 actions. 7 actions if the Vob Stalker wasn't nullified. So Sneaky's ahead on actions. He's also ahead on action potential with the lands that he has in play. And he's catching up as far as tempo. YoYo is still in the lead, 3 stones to 2. But it's a lot closer than it was. YoYo finally decides to pull the trigger and play Indra's Citadel in Realm 6. Sneaky decides to draw a card. YoYo passes, and Sneaky draws another card. YoYo passes again. And it's back to Sneaky. He draws another card. More than likely, YoYo will just pass again. Sneaky's just drawing an insane amount of cards. And he's definitely drawing into more things that can just get him even more actions. This deck just snowballs. It's crazy. He draws again. He's down to 3 actions. He decides to play a Resonance Reach into Realm 6. When he harvests it, he'll be able to get 3 shield counters, which is just crazy. And he still has 2 actions left. YoYo will pass again. And Sneaky Joe is not done. He harvests his Resonance Reach. YoYo will gain an energy from that. Sneaky will gain an action, putting him at 3 actions. But more importantly, he'll get 3 shield counters, which is crazy. 𝐷𝐄𝐈 is just so good. He puts 1 shield counter on his Plant Terror of Ethereal Grove, 1 shield counter on the Betrayer, a shield counter on, it looks like, 𝐾𝐿𝐼, and then a 2nd shield counter on Plant Terror. So it looks like they're continuing to overlook the fact that that Vob Stalker is nullified by the Sirius. Sneaky then plays Commanding Croak the Leader into Realm 6, allowing him to seek another land to gain exponential actions and just keep the snowball rolling. And it looks like he's not going to wait. He decides to use the tap 3 ability immediately, seek 5 a land, so he'll reveal the top 5 cards from his deck. He does find a land, but he also finds John Breakbang, which is another absolutely insane addition to this deck. Because you have 3 Commanding Croaks in the deck that are constantly seeking, and could potentially even be untapped sometimes to be used a second time, you have a really good chance of hitting a John Breakbang, and that's exactly what happened here. He gets to come out for free if you reveal him from the deck. He drops in Realm 4, and Sneaky also finds a land with the Croak's ability, the first, and he drops the first into realm 6, immediately harvesting it for another action. You can tell that YoYo is so done. He just wants this round to be over, and Sneaky just won't let it happen. Sneaky decides to play another Sunfire City into realm 5. And then he decides to attack in realm 5, taking the stone. And finally, the round will come to an end. It is the beginning of round 7, the final round. And things are just getting started because we're only halfway through the game. That's how crazy this deck is. Both players will draw a card at the beginning of the round. Sneaky will get to start here because he was the last person to claim a stone, seizing that stone in realm 5. He is in a winning position, so he could just start by passing. It looks like they're both remembering that 𝐷𝐄𝐈𝐈 is dead now, because it got the -1 counters while it had the temporary +5 buff from the Razzia, and now that +5 buff is gone, so the counters kick in, killing the 𝐷𝐄𝐈𝐈. And it looks like Sneaky's going to start by harvesting the Market of Lost Wonders. And it looks like he's going to gain 4 actions here and an energy, but he really should only be gaining 3 actions and no energy because that Vob Stalker and the Betrayer of Ironskin Clan are both nullified by YoYo's Sirius. YoYo's going to follow up by dropping a 𝐷𝐄𝐈𝐈. So now he has 2 𝐷𝐄𝐈𝐈s on the board, being able to multiply his on-harvest abilities. And then Sneaky Joe follows up by dropping a Blazing Phoenix Pub in realm 7. It's worth pointing out that this is a very complicated board state. There are a ton of actions, a ton of triggers, way more cards being played than you'd normally see in a game. So I can't really fault even the best players for overlooking something like the Sirius when there's just so much going on. There's so many cards, there's just so much happening on this board. This deck is just so crazy, there's so much to keep track of. It's very easy to overlook minor details. Looks like both players are trying to figure out how best to sequence the cards in their hands to get ahead. And YoYo is going to start by harvesting a bunch of lands, and maybe his Kalyths? Looks like he'll harvest just his lands. The Indra's Citadel will give him an extra action, which will be an extra 3 actions because of his 2 𝐷𝐄𝐈𝐈s, giving him 4 actions. And the Emerald Clearing will give him 1 action, but will give him 3 triggers of the +2 buff that it gives because of the 2 𝐷𝐄𝐈𝐈s, putting a +6 buff on his Kalyth. Just an insane amount of value. And it looks like Sneaky Joe's considering harvesting the Blazing Phoenix Pub, but he's getting a little bit gun-shy with it. He might be holding off. It's the final round, so all bets are off. Both players are going to throw everything they have at each other. And it's going to be absolutely insane to witness. There's still so much of this game left. The thing you need to understand about this deck is getting to round 7 is the beginning of the game. This deck can do more in round 7 than the entire rest of the game combined. It's crazy. YoYo decides to drop an Ethereal Grove in realm 6. And it looks like he's deciding to symbiosis with the Blazing Phoenix Pub. So now both players have essentially a Blazing Phoenix Pub in play. Both players can turn every wonder they have legendary, both players can untap a legendary wonder, and both players can copy those triggers with their 𝐷𝐄𝐈 abilities. YoYo is going to have to dig deep if he wants to come back in this game. SneakyJoe just has so much value now, it's going to be really, really hard to climb back out. That being said, if YoYo can find his John Breakbang, especially now that he has a copy of SneakyJoe's Blazing Phoenix Pub because of the Ethereal Grove, maybe that can buff up all of his wonders enough that it gives him a fighting chance. It'll definitely be really interesting to see just how far this game goes. The one thing to note about this deck in particular is that it's never over even if it seems like it's over. This thing just pulls action potential out of nowhere and snowballs into insanity even if it looks like you're behind. YoYo decides to harvest both of his Kaeliths, gaining an extra 2 actions, and also gaining energy from the Betrayer. And then it's back to SneakyJoe. SneakyJoe is in the lead now, so if he wanted to, he could just pass. The question is, will he? Looks like both players are considering all of their options. YoYo definitely has some digging to do for sure. And will SneakyJoe pass? It looks like SneakyJoe is about to pass. So it'll be back to YoYo. And YoYo decides to spend an action to play another Sunfire City, this time in Realm 7. Doesn't do a whole lot for him, doesn't have any crazy on harvest abilities, simply being able to regain control of all cards that you own, which in this matchup isn't going to do a whole lot. SneakyJoe drew a card, and then YoYo followed that up by playing his own Blazing Phoenix Pub. So now YoYo essentially has 2 Blazing Phoenix Pubs in play, with both of their abilities active, and then SneakyJoe decides to drop a Clear Sky Eerie into Realm 2. Which means the first wonder he plays there that has an on-arrival ability, he'll get to trigger an extra time. Looks like both players are doing the math, trying to figure out exactly how much power SneakyJoe has in Realm 3. And it will be back to YoYo. Does he have an answer? He drops a Commanding Croak the Leader in Realm 3. It looks like he is going to try to build up some power there and contest the realm. He also gets access to a tap-free Seek 5 to find a land ability, which is very, very relevant when you consider the fact that he has 2 Chieftain Clees online. SneakyJoe continuing to draw cards. And it looks like it's back to YoYo. SneakyJoe draws another card. And YoYo decides to use the Commanding Croak the Leader's tap free ability to Seek 5 a land. He does hit a land in Indra Citadel, puts it off to the side. Not the best land to pick in this case, because the Commanding Croak is in realm 3, which is an odd numbered realm. So the Indra Citadel won't generate extra actions if it drops there. But lucky for him, he also hits a Clear Sky Eyrie. Makes all the sense in the world to pick the Clear Sky Eyrie here. It gives you more value since that Indra Citadel won't be turned on. Normally I try to always stick to playing Commanding Croak in even numbered realms if I can help it, at least if I know I have Indra Citadels in the deck. But sometimes you just have to play it where you need to play it, and that was the case here. So it was good luck for YoYo that he was able to hit that Clear Sky Eyrie. Now he also has the ability of double triggering an on arrival ability that he plays later this round. And it is back to Sneaky Joe. He decides to spend an action to draw a card. And YoYo is going to harvest his Sunfire City. Gaining another action. And it is back to Sneaky. Sneaky's down to 2 actions. Looks like Sneaky passes and YoYo decides to draw a card. Sneaky passes again and YoYo decides to play a card. It is an Eye of Pattaya in Realm 3, which is an absolutely insane amount of value. They're counting all of the lands. It looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Lands that YoYo has, and at least the same amount that Sneaky has. He decides to harvest his Clear Sky Eyrie for an action, and YoYo decides to attack in 3, taking the stone with his insane power boost he got from Eye of Pattaya. It's back to Sneaky now. Looks like both players have 3 actions left. And both players have lands that they can still harvest. It just never stops. This deck just keeps going. It's like the Energizer Bunny. Sneaky decides to play his own Cedar Shade Ruins in Realm 7. Looks like he's trying to potentially prevent nullification there for something he has planned later on that he hasn't dropped yet. And YoYo decides to harvest another Sunfire City, gaining an extra action, gaining some energy. Sneaky decides to spend an action to play another Vobstalker into Realm 7. And once again, Sirius is still out, so the Vobstalker would be nullified. But the Sirius continues to be overlooked. The Vobstalker does come into play with extra +1 counters from the Quiet Creeks, which means it's able to symbiose with something that is 4 power rather than just the normal 2 power. And it looks like Sneaky Joe is considering symbiosing with the Commanding Croak the leader, but he's also starting to realize that his deck is pretty thin. He's running out of cards quickly, and it might be smarter to symbiosis with his Kalith to get an extra action that way rather than dig for a land just because he's so low on cards. So I think what he's going to do here is he's going to take back choosing to symbiosis with the Commanding Croak and instead symbiosis with the Calyth. Normally, the Commanding Croak would be the right play if you had more cards in your deck, but at this point in the game, it's just smarter to make sure you have an extra action. And he does just that. It's back to YoYo. It's worth pointing out that YoYo is winning right now, 3 stones to 2. So he is managing to claw his way back, but he still really needs to find his own John Breakbang if he wants to really have a chance here. Sneaky decides to harvest his Calyth, gaining an action. And he's also going to harvest the Vobstalker, which is copying the Calyth's ability. Again, the Vobstalker should be nullified by the Sirius, but that's being overlooked. Sneaky's back up to 3 actions. Both players have a lot to consider here. The game is not even close to done. It might look it, it's not. Don't be fooled. That's how crazy this deck is. Sneaky decides to attack in Realm 6, taking the stone. And now it is tied up 3 stones to 3 stones, with YoYo having the stone in Realm 1, so he's technically winning. And it's back to YoYo. He decides to harvest his Clear Sky Eyrie to gain an action. He's also going to gain an energy from his Betrayer of Ironskin clan. And it is back to Sneaky Joe. Sneaky Joe still has more action potential than YoYo. He decides to attack in Realm 7, taking the stone there. This is going to put Sneaky Joe in the lead finally. And now that YoYo is behind, he's not going to be able to pass and allow Sneaky Joe to burn up actions. He's going to have to fight for it. He decides to drop a Waranoko into Realm 4. Absolutely insane value. He gets to turn 3 of his lands into legendary wonders that have power equal to the number of lands he has. And since this deck is all about lands and has a ton of lands, each one of those wonders is going to be really powerful. He decides to put 2 of them in the same realm in Realm 4. He clearly wants to fight for that stone there. The question is, where does he put the 3rd growth counter? Looks like he's going to put it on his land in Realm 1, trying to shore up his defenses there and make it harder for Sneaky Joe to take the stone there. Sneaky decides to spend an action and drop a Gearhart Enclave Inner, which will give him access to potential shield counters if he plays an item there. YoYo follows up by attacking in Realm 4, taking the stone, putting him in the lead, and now putting him into a position where he can safely pass and try to get Sneaky Joe to burn through his actions. And it looks like Sneaky Joe is going to drop his own Waranoko, which can effectively counter YoYo's Waranoko by also creating 2 huge legendary wonders in the same realm, in Realm 4. And he's going to do exactly that. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's why he chose to play the Gearhart Enclave Inner into Realm 4 first, so that he would have 2 lands there, so that he could then play the Waranoko and catch back up to YoYo in Realm 4. He also has the slight advantage of playing the Waranoko second by getting to ignore Realm 1 and put the 3rd growth counter into Realm 2. YoYo's going to spend an action to draw a card. It's back to Sneaky. He has 1 action left. And he decides to attack in 4 and take back the stone. It is a knockdown, drag-out war over Realm 4. Just an insane amount of power. Both players are kind of doing a double take right now. Each of those lands in Realm 4 is a 20 power wonder because of 16 lands under Sneaky's control, plus the +4 power buff from the John Breakbang. Looks like both players are doing the math, trying to make sure. Sneaky Joe definitely has more power in 4 than YoYo. And even though Sneaky hasn't used his Blazing Phoenix pub yet, those growth counters turn those lands into legendary wonders, so they're still going to get the buff from the John Breakbang even without him harvesting the Blazing Phoenix pub. What does YoYo do to fight back against this? It does look like he's got a card in mind. He drops 𝐅𝐵𝑎𝑐ℎ into Realm 6. It's going to give him access to a huge power swing. 9 power in Realm 6 plus the ability to tap free, give anything -5 and anything else +5 for the rest of the game essentially, because it is the last round. It's also worth pointing out that because it's attuned Patraya, he didn't even have to spend an action to play it. Such a big swing. And Sneaky responds by harvesting his Blazing Phoenix pub, which will give him an action and allow him to untap multiple wonders because he gets to copy the ability with the 𝐿𝐼𝐷𝐄𝐈 ability. And he does have a 𝐿𝐼𝐷𝐄𝐈 ability still on his Plant Terror. Although, again, the Vob Stalker should be nullified, so he shouldn't be untapping a third wonder here. Either way, it's an insane amount of value. And YoYo's going to harvest his own Blazing Phoenix pub, buffing up his entire board, and letting him untap 3 different wonders as well. Because Sneaky already used his pub and turned all of his wonders into legendaries, he's able to untap one of his as well, because each player gets to untap a legendary wonder. Usually that's really hard for your opponent to do, because there are only a handful of legendary wonders with tap abilities. But because of the pub, he gets to untap his Commanding Croak in Realm 6. And it looks like he's going to use that ability to seek 5. It also looks like YoYo untapped his land in Realm 1. I think he realized afterwards that he had the ability to untap a legendary wonder because of Sneaky Joe harvesting a Blazing Phoenix pub. But I think what he overlooked is you can only untap a non-land legendary wonder. So he definitely made a mistake there untapping that Brimstone in Realm 1. He shouldn't have been able to untap that when Sneaky Joe harvested his Blazing Phoenix pub. Looks like Sneaky Joe found an Indra's Citadel with the Commanding Croak, giving him access to even more insane action potential. And YoYo has both of his Calyths and a Commanding Croak untapped. Not to mention he still has the 𝐅𝐵𝑎𝑐ℎ untapped. These decks just don't ever run out of gas. Literally ever. They just keep going until there's no deck left. It's so crazy to witness. When I watched this game happening in person, I was blown away. That being said, I do think there are a couple of ideas that are worth exploring that could really give this deck a run for its money. And I'll be trying those out in Milwaukee for sure. YoYo decided to use his 𝐅𝐈𝐑𝐿 to give himself +5 power and give -5 power to the Commanding Croak in Realm 6. And it looks like Sneaky Joe is going to harvest the Indra's Citadel for what should be 3 extra actions. YoYo decides to harvest the Calyth, both Calyths, gaining 2 actions himself. And they just keep going. They never run out of gas. You gain a ton of extra actions, you use the actions to find more things that can gain you more actions, and you just keep going. Sneaky decides to drop a Fungalith. Finally, the first Fungalith of the game. Both of these decks have a number of Fungalith in them. A 12 power wonder that costs 8. But that cost is a little bit deceiving, because when it attacks, or actually on battle, you get to banish any card in the Abyss and gain 4 energy. So you can get 4 energy out of the 7 it costs right back. On arrival, it gets to put up to 4 -1 counters on target wonder. He decides to put them on the Sirius Aetherblade in Realm 2, and he gets a double trigger because of the Clear Sky Eerie. So he's actually got 8 minus counters on Sirius. YoYo decides to harvest his Ethereal Grove, which is a copy of the Blazing Phoenix pub, and untap his Razia and both of his Calyths again. Just never running out of gas. Sneaky Joe decides to untap his Commanding Croak, because he also gets to untap a Legendary Wonder. And then he uses the Commanding Croak's ability, tap free, seek 5 a land. He does find a land, another Gearheart Enclave Inner. And the round just keeps going. It's back to YoYo. Will he ever find his John Breakbang? That's the question. If he does, he can easily turn this board upside down. He decides to harvest both of his Calyths again, gain 2 more actions, and Sneaky Joe follows suit by using his 𝐅𝐼𝐑𝐿. He almost used the Plant Terror, which is copying the 𝐅𝐼𝐑𝐿, but decides to use the actual 𝐅𝐼𝐑𝐿 first. I think because it only has 1 shield counter, whereas the Plant Terror has 2. It's a negligible difference, but still technically the right play. He decides to give the Sirius -5, which is enough to finally kill it because of the -8 counters it already had. Then it's back to YoYo, and YoYo decides to use his Commanding Croak to seek 5 a land. He reveals a Commanding Croak, a John Breakbang. He finally found his John. And with the 5th card, he hits a land as well. So he gets to put both a Sunfire City and a John Breakbang into play for free. Now the Sunfire City itself has to go in the same realm as the Commanding Croak, so it'll go into Realm 3. The John Breakbang gets to go into any realm he wants. And this might be the push that he needed to catch up to Sneaky Joe. Remember, because of harvesting the Blazing Phoenix pub prior, all of his wonders are legendary right now, which means John Breakbang is giving a +4 buff to every single wonder on YoYo's board. And Sneaky has the same thing on his side. Both of these boards are absolutely crazy. Sneaky decides to spend an action and draw a card. And it's back to YoYo. Is the John Breakbang enough power to get the job done? Hard to say. I think he's going to need just a little bit more of a push. Looks like he decides to draw a card. And it's back to Sneaky. And it looks like Sneaky's going to drop a land into Realm 7? No, he decides to play an Ashen Leaf. He takes back the Ashen Leaf and he plays a land. He changed his mind. He plays a Quiet Creek into Realm 7. I guess it makes sense to play the third Quiet Creek before you play the Ashen Leaf. So now he has another land in Realm 7. And YoYo decides to use his 𝐅𝐈𝐑𝐿 again, boosting him up another 5, and doing another -5 to the Commanding Croak in Realm 6, killing it and getting it off the board. Sneaky Joe decides to harvest his Quiet Creek for an action, and it is back to YoYo. Looks like YoYo is going to attack in 6 now that the way is clear, and take the stone there. Sneaky Joe decides to play that Ashen Leaf. It's going to come in with 5 power because it comes in with 3+1 counters from the 3 Quiet Creeks, which is not nothing. It also gives him access to another harvest ability to get him another action. It's back to YoYo. And it looks like YoYo drew a card. And it looks like Sneaky's gonna harvest the Ashen Leaf. Both players just duking it out back and forth, unwilling to ever run out of actions. Looks like both players are doing some math. YoYo does still have that Sunfire City untapped down there. He also has the Brimstone Crypt in Realm 1, but again, he shouldn't have that untapped because that Blazing Phoenix pub only lets you untap a non-land legendary wonder. But again, there's so much going on, it's so easy for either player to overlook small things. And YoYo decides to drop a Resonance Reach into Realm 6. If he harvests it, he'll be able to get 3 shield counters. He does decide to harvest it, gains an action, gains 3 shield counters. He decides to put them on Razia. And I think John Breakbang. And where does the third one go? Looks like he decides to put it on the Sirius. It's back to Sneaky. He decides to spend an action to draw a card. YoYo's going to spend an action to draw a card as well. Looks like both players are just digging for ways to get ahead of their opponent. Sneaky spends another action to draw a card. And it's back to YoYo. Sometimes in round 7, it's worth it to try to burn your opponent out of actions first. But with this deck, you just never run out of actions, so it's kind of hard to do. YoYo decides to drop his own Fungalith Colossus, this one in Realm 7. And he'll get to put 4 -1 counters on something. Looks like he's weighing his options here. Fungolith Colossus is an absolute beast. It effectively only costs you 3 energy because you get 4 back as soon as you attack with it. 3 energy for 12 power and 4 -1 counters on something, and the ability to banish cards, and the ability to generate energy, just seems crazy. Looks like he decides to put the -1 counters on the Ashen Leaf, and because it had 3 +1 counters on it, it now goes to just 1 -1 counter. So it's effectively a 1 power, and it did come out after the Blazing Phoenix Pub was harvested, so it is not a legendary wonder. Looks like Sneaky Joe is looking to drop something. He drops another Chieftain Klee into Realm 7. Which means even more action potential if he can get more lands with on-harvest abilities. And it's back to YoYo. YoYo decides to attack in Realm 7, take the stone there. And if he wants, he can banish something and generate 4 energy. Sneaky decides to harvest his Sunfire City, gaining an action, and mistakenly gaining an energy, because again, that Betrayer of Ironskin Clan is nullified because of Sirius. It's back to YoYo. YoYo still has an uphill battle here, but he's not out of it, not by a long shot. This deck just never runs out of gas, so it can come out of nowhere and just snowball into insanity. Looks like YoYo is considering harvesting, and he does. He harvests his Sunfire City. I'm pretty sure that's his last untapped land. And then Sneaky Joe decides to play another Kaelith in Realm 1. Untapping his Indra's Citadel in Realm 6. Such a crazy play this late in the game, getting access to all of that action generation all over again with an additional Chieftain Klee on the board now. Is there anything YoYo can do to keep up? Sneaky just never lets his foot off the gas. It's crazy. It's also interesting that he chose to put it in Realm 1. I thought for sure he would have given up on Realm 1 by now because of all of the Protector counters. He decides to harvest his Indra's Citadel, gaining him 5 actions, and now you can finally start to see just how crazy this deck can be. If you can constantly just find lands that can generate 5 actions and potentially some energy on harvest, and also just untap those lands with Kaelith or Blazing Phoenix Pub, it's just, it never runs out of gas. Sneaky decides to harvest his Kaelith, and then he attacks in Realm 2, taking the stone. It's also worth pointing out that attacking in Realm 2 is going to trigger YoYo's bow, because the bow ability triggers on battle, which means it'll trigger on attacks, but it'll also trigger on defense. I think Sneaky Joe knows this. I think he's intentionally attacking in Realm 2 to trigger the bow to try and deck YoYo and make him run out of cards. Both players are critically low on cards in their deck by this point, and I think Sneaky Joe's starting to realize that the only chance either player really has of winning the game is by decking the other player, because the board is just an absolute mess. Seems like he's trying to attack into, force YoYo to draw cards with the bow, and hope that YoYo doesn't notice what his plan is, so that he can maybe deck YoYo before YoYo realizes what's going on. Hard to say for sure. Both players are very low on cards at this point. But they still have cards to play. This game is not quite over just yet. In fact, it looks like YoYo has something in mind. He decides to drop a Nexus Phasebringer into Realm 3, triggering his Clear Sky Eerie so he gets double triggers. He could banish up to 2 target items and create 2 copies of an item in banishment. He decides to banish his own bow, more than likely so that he can create 2 bows in 2 different realms. Although maybe it's worth putting them in the same realm. Getting to attack and trigger 2 bows at the same time seems kind of crazy. He decides to put the first copy of the bow into Realm 3. More than likely it's equipped to the Eye of Petria. And then he has a second copy, which he decides to put into Realm 7, equipped to the Fungalith. So it looks like Sneaky Joe's no longer able to trigger the bow in 2, but he does have 2 different options. If he wants to try to continue to deck YoYo, he could attack in either 3 or 7. He decides to tap his Plant Terror of Ethereal Grove, using the ability he stole from Razia to give the 𝐷𝐄𝐈𝐿 in Realm 1 -5. Then it is back to YoYo. Looks like he also put the +5 in Realm 1 as well. On his Caliph? Does YoYo have a solid response? He decides to play another Commanding Croak into Realm 5. Like I said before, I sound like a broken record at this point, but this deck just never runs out of gas. Sneaky Joe decides to play another Scouting Barnail into Realm 5. It's going to come in with 9 +1 counters on it, so it's an 11 power, which is just insane. And YoYo follows up by using the Commanding Croak's tap free ability to seek 5 a land. And it looks like he has plenty of options there. Looks like that might be a Market of Lost Wonders on top. But I don't think he's going to pick it. It looks like he decides to grab the Twilight Marsh. He puts the Twilight Marsh into Realm 5, giving him access to even more actions. If he harvests it, he gets 2 actions if something died, and then an extra action for each of his 𝐷𝐄𝐈𝐿s, which is going to be a total of 4 or maybe 5 actions. I think it's 4. Looks like YoYo's counting the number of cards in his deck now. It seems like he's starting to realize that either player could be defeated simply by running out of cards. And it looks like he's got about 15 cards left, whereas Sneaky Joe only has a few. Sneaky's in a very dangerous position because of that. He definitely can't afford to play his own bow. He decides to harvest his Kael'thas to gain another action. And it is back to YoYo. YoYo decides to harvest his Twilight Marsh, giving him 4 actions. And I have a feeling YoYo is starting to catch on to the fact that he could defeat SneakyJoe by forcing him to run out of cards if he can just find a way. It would have been sweet if when playing the Nexus you could have created copies under your opponent's control so that YoYo could have decked SneakyJoe out that way. But it looks like he has to dig for another way to get the job done. Looks like SneakyJoe attacks into the bow, forces him to draw more cards. He shoots out more -1 counters, this time onto the 𝐷𝐿𝐴 in Realm 7. And it is back to YoYo. Does YoYo have any more tricks up his sleeve? This board state is absolute insanity. There are just cards everywhere, counters everywhere, tokens everywhere, and YoYo drops the cast out. Look at the top 2 cards of target player's deck, banish any number of them, put the rest back in any order, draw a card. This will effectively allow him to banish the top 2 cards of SneakyJoe's deck, and then draw a card himself. If I'm right, that puts SneakyJoe at just 1 card left in his deck. If YoYo just happened to have the second cast out, he could just win on the spot. Or maybe there's some other way in his deck to force SneakyJoe to draw a card. And it's not like other games where you have to be able to draw a card and not be able to draw a card in order to lose. As soon as you're out of cards in your deck, you just lose on the spot. YoYo's looking over his board state, counting up how many lands he has, trying to figure out his best possible play lines, his best possible outs to seal the deal and get this game finished. Sneaky decides to attack into the bow again, forcing YoYo to draw 2 cards. He's down to about 10 cards in his deck. And then he's got it. He's got the second cast out. He plays cast out, doesn't even cost him an action because it's attuned. And he forces SneakyJoe to banish the last card in his deck, making him lose on the spot. What a crazy game. And as you can see, the board is nuts. Both players have almost every single card in their deck just on the board. Both players have used an insane amount of actions. In fact, I challenge any of you watching this to count up how many actions were used throughout the course of this game by each player and list them in the comments. Because I bet you it's hitting triple digits. But you can see how this deck is just completely and utterly absurd. Shout out to Vortex for coming up with such an insane deck idea. I do have a crazy idea of how to defeat this, and I'm going to play that deck in Milwaukee, and I'm sure a lot of people will be playing a deck like this, so wish me luck, and congratulations to YoYo on the first place finish. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck text, that's somewhere over there. And if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.